Hello, I'm going to be looking at the first 5 minutes of Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, which is a game by Starbreeze, who were most known probably for making the Riddick games, and this is about as different as you can possibly get. This is it's a kind of single-player co-op game with some puzzles and a nice little story, and it's unlike pretty much anything I've played in terms of its mechanics. At least the story is nothing particularly remarkable other than the way it intertwines really perfectly with the controls, and the actual aesthetics of the game are lovely. The visuals and the music are really quite fantastic. Now, in doing these first 5-minute videos, I've been trying to figure out what to do if a game has extensive cutscenes at the start, because obviously the idea is that we look at the first 5 minutes to see how effectively the game uses that time. And I've looked at Proteus and Portal 2, both of which kick off immediately with interactive elements that you can actually be involved with. Obviously a lot of games don't do that, they take their time and have a movie of some kind play at the start. Brothers has this little sequence here where we see the younger brother looking at the grave of what turns out to be his mother, and we discover that something rather terrible happened. So in terms of clocking the 5 minutes, I'm going to, from now on in these videos, basically start the clock from the moment that something interactive becomes available. So yeah, we can take a look at this cutscene, and obviously it's telling you the kind of basis for the younger brother's character. We know that this family has had a tragedy in the past, and it's still weighing quite heavily on this kid. We don't yet know what we're going to be doing in this story, in this adventure. We don't know what the gameplay is. We can assume maybe this guy's going to be the protagonist, this young kid. You know, a lot of fantasy adventures have you going off as a young kid on some grand adventure to find redemption or heroism or some such. With the arrival of this ghost, we're now knowing that there are fantastical elements in this universe to some degree, greater or lesser. And that is quite important because it sets up what kind of world we're in. And this is a very fantastical world, and by doing that by the start, you know tonally what kind of thing you're going to be expecting. Okay, this is the first we see of the older brother and their father, who is evidently quite ill. And this is actually the story of both of these brothers, and you control both of them at the same time using a single controller. Don't try and play this with the mouse and keyboard, it doesn't really work. The way it maps to the controller is the left bumper and the left stick controls, I think, the older brother, and the right bumper and the right stick control the younger brother. That's pretty much all there is to it. You have a movement and an action key for both of those characters. So you can see here that I can hold the left trigger to have the big brother pick up the cart, and then the little brother can also hold on to it, and you hold down those triggers to do that. And now we can move around, and you're controlling them both at the same time, and this is a really unusual mechanic. So if I just move the little brother, we're quite slow. If I pull the sticks in opposite directions, we don't go anywhere. If I push them both in the same direction, then both brothers are working together to push this cart down the hill. It takes a bit getting used to. There's very few games where you're having to do two completely separate things with one controller at the same time. Obviously, in a first-person shooter, you would be moving and controlling where you're looking, but that's still controlling a singular character. Here you're having to use your brain to pay attention to two completely separate things on the screen, doing quite often separate tasks. At the start here, the game deliberately keeps you quite contained, so both these brothers are connected to the cart. It's nice and simple, they're moving in the same direction with the same object, and it's almost like controlling a single object, so it's a gentle introduction to this whole concept. But then at this point, we're forced to separate them off a little bit, and we can instantly see that the younger brother can't pull this lever. I doubt it's a coincidence that when the cutscene finishes at the start, the younger brother is at the front of the cart, because inevitably that guides you towards using the younger brother first to try and pull that lever down, and you discover that he can't do it. So you then try the older brother, and the game has quite effortlessly demonstrated that these two kids have different abilities. And it's not doing this through like on-screen prompts or tutorials, it's just all coming about naturally through what you're doing. And so we already know that you have to work together to do stuff. We can see that this younger kid can't reach the rope ladder, so we use both the guys together, and that pushes him up. So it's kind of embedding the concept of cooperatively working together, and it's forcing separation between the two characters. So you've got one character below the cliff, the other one at top, and it's kind of gradually increasing the complexity of what you're having to do with these two different characters. And what's really interesting with this whole mechanic is that you have this kind of puzzle element where you're trying to figure out how to get these two characters around the place and achieve their aims, and it's very simple controls, but they're so precisely mapped onto these two characters, and their abilities define their characters, so every single action you do is helping to expand upon their characteristics and who they are as people. It's not done through dialogue, it's not done through fancy cutscenes, although we do have some of those. It's done entirely through your player actions. That's what informs those two characters. That's pretty unusual. I can't think of many games where the gameplay itself is so precisely tied in to what you're doing with the story. So there are occasional cutscenes in the game. This one establishes that the father is ill and that we have to go off on some grand quest to find something to help him. It's kind of overlong, but it's interesting again that there's no real dialogue in the game. It's all this kind of made up mumbly language, which gives it a really nice fairy tale kind of quality. Like, what these people are saying isn't as important as their actions, and that kind of comes through in everything you do in the game. And we do obviously have this wonderful music as well. It's one of the best scores that has ever been made for a game, if you want to take my opinion. Okay, so we now kind of have the quest, and there's not much more to the story than this. You're essentially off on this adventure to find the thing that will cure your dad. That is the point of the game, in terms of your kind of driving motivation. But then the rest of the game is about these two characters and their relationship, and the fact that they're brothers and they have to work together continuously through the story, and the fact that it's single player. So theoretically you could have this game be a two-player game, where you'd have one person controlling the older brother, one person controlling the younger brother. And that would probably be quite fun. You could go on an adventure together, but this game does some particularly unique things by forcing it into single player, and by having one person play as both these people on a single controller. Because the more you play the game, the more your brain adapts to that really unusual way of working, and you get used to your hands having to do these two different characters at the same time. And the longer you play, the more you get used to that. And the game plays with that in some very clever ways in the story later on, which I'm not going to get into. So here we have this example where the older brother is a good swimmer, the younger brother is terrified of water and can't swim. So again, you have to work together. And although it's kind of a mechanics thing, you know, it's a puzzle solving stuff. We've had games in the past where there's like some assistant character who will help you, or you have to help them or escort them or something like that. This is doing that, but it's doing it in such a heartwarming, charming, authentic way in terms of the character, that every puzzle and every action you have to take is enhancing these two guys and their relationship with one another. Okay, so that's the 5 minutes up. On the surface, not much has happened. We haven't gone very far or done very much, but the game's subtly started to put in place a lot of the story and mechanical elements that will play out throughout the rest of the game. But if you want to know what happens, you have to go and play it. It's a great game. I highly recommend you do